Hi everyone and welcome to UCTV Alive for Kids. Today we've got another Antarctica episode, which if you tuned in last month, we've had a few of these lately. UCTV is a monthly webinar where we bring on different interesting Tasmanians to talk about their jobs or talk about something really interesting from their area of expertise. And this month is Leah Connery from the Mawson's Huts Foundation. And she travels around the state in a mobile Antarctic classroom, which you're really lucky today to see inside without her coming to your school or going to an event that you're at. But before I welcome Leah to the screen, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. Your camera's disabled, your mic's disabled. That just keeps everyone safe. UCT is an interactive show, so send us through some questions later on in the break. I'd also love to acknowledge country. So today we're zooming in from Aboriginal land, sea and waterways online. And I acknowledge with deep respect the traditional owners of this land that we're zooming in from and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging and those that didn't make elder status. Yes, so the Tasmanian Aboriginal community continue to care for country, and we're lucky to live here and to be learning from lots of different people like Leah about different parts of the world. So I'm going to invite now Leah to turn on her video and turn on her mic and introduce herself. Hi, Leah.
Hi, everyone. It's lovely to meet you. I could say see you, but I can't see any of you, so I can't say that. But my name is Leah. It's lovely to meet you. I'm from the Mawson's Huts Foundation, and if you've heard of the name Mawson before, you'll get a hint as to what we're talking about. Huts, I'm sure you all know what huts are. You live in them sometimes. And foundation, that just means that we're a group of people who are on a mission to do something. And that mission is to look after the huts that Sir Douglas Mawson built when he went down to Antarctica over 100 years ago. They are still down in Antarctica in a super duper windy spot. And so the foundation looks after those huts. We also do something else that's really cool, which you're going to have a look at in a minute with me.
Awesome. That was a great introduction, Leah. I think I'm going to hand over for you to show us this other part of your work, which is this awesome bus that you're in. So I'm going to turn off my camera and mute myself and let you take the floor to show everyone a bit of this bus. I'll talk to you later.
Perfect. Thanks, Tess. Okay, now you guys are super duper lucky because some people see the outside of this bus, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. But not many people get to see the inside because it's quite small. And if you imagine trying to fit your whole class in this space, it's not going to work. So this works really well. What I'll do is I'll take you outside just for a minute, and hopefully the wind doesn't get in our way, and show you what this looks like from the outside. Here we go. So this thing is what I spend a lot of my time in, going around the state. And this is my friend called Denison. If you could see his feet, they're the same level as mine. Denison is the height of an emperor penguin. An emperor penguin is the tallest kind of penguin in the world. So if you're taller than 115 centimeters, then you are taller than all the penguins that are alive today. Isn't that fun? So you can see this bus rolling down through your street. You're not going to miss it very easily, but most people don't get to see the inside. So come on in and we'll have a look. So I drive around in this about 8 weeks of the year. And let's see what you're seeing. Oh yeah, look at those penguins. Like we said before, there's Denison, the emperor penguin, the largest penguin of them all. And you'll see as we move along, that's a lot of penguins. There are 18 kinds of penguins in the world. Only 5 of them live in Antarctica. All 18 of them are found in this bus, but not real live ones because they wouldn't like living in here all the time. So this is where I spend about 8 weeks of the year traveling around Tasmania and talking to people, to students, about the place that you can see on that map over there called Antarctica. Now it's much bigger than this in real life, you know. Maybe it's about 5 times the size of my hand. In fact, Antarctica is 1.8 times the size of Australia. So it is more than, or just about 2 times the size of Australia. Now, there's something really special about living in Tasmania and being in Hobart, especially, is that there are 5 cities around the world that everyone uses to get to Antarctica. They're called the gateway cities. So, you know, we use gateways to get through somewhere and go somewhere. That's what these 5 cities are used for. One of those is Hobart, which is down here. There's another one in South Africa, all the way up here in Cape Town. There's another one on this edge over here in Ushuaia, which is in Argentina. Then there's Punta Arenas, which is in Chile. And then down here, we've got Christchurch in New Zealand. Those are the 5 Antarctic gateways, which means that if you live in or around Hobart, you are part of a very special club, the Antarctic Gateway Club, which is really, really fun. So we talk a lot about Douglas Mawson, who was an Australian Antarctic expeditioner. I'll show you what he looked like. Here we go. Where is he? There he is. There's Douglas Mawson. That's his iconic balaclava. And these are the men that he took down to Antarctica with him over 100 years ago. It says on here that he was the first person to lead an Australian group of people, or sorry, the first Australian to lead a group of people to Antarctica, and the first person ever to lead a science expedition to Antarctica. So he is super duper important to Australia. Here we go. Here's another fun fact. Remember how I said Antarctica is just about 2 times the size of Australia? That's what it would look like. And there's little New Zealand. So Antarctica is a lot bigger than New Zealand. Now, we love penguins. If Denison here, if our emperor penguin is the biggest kind of penguin, and we walk all the way down, does anyone know what the smallest kind of penguin is? Let's see if you can get it before we get there. Oh, look at him, the little or the blue penguin. He was also known as the fairy penguin for a little while. He actually lives in spots around Tasmania, which is really fun. We've got penguins in Tasmania and penguins in Antarctica. But whereas Antarctica has 5 kinds of penguins, we only have 1. And the rest of them, the other penguins, that don't live in Antarctica, they live on the islands or the countries that are around Antarctica. And there's only 1 penguin that lives in the top side of the Earth in the northern hemisphere, which is super crazy. So let's see. Our chinstrap penguin, he lives in Antarctica. The Adelie penguin lives in Antarctica. The macaroni penguin, that always gets a laugh, he lives in Antarctica. So does the Gentoo penguin. Now I've got 2 fun facts to tell you about the Gentoo penguin before we have a chance to hear some questions, I think. The Gentoo penguin, he is the fastest kind of penguin in the world. So he swims at about 36 kilometers per hour, which means that if you are driving in a car past your school on the way home, you have to drive 40 kilometers per hour. And if you look out your window and you picture a penguin swimming alongside you, that's about how fast the Gentoo penguin swims. And the second fun fact is that the Gentoo penguin can shoot its poo 1.5 meters. Now, I found out today that a student remembered that from when I told them at the beginning of last year. I wonder how long that fun fact will stick in your head. Tess, there are so many more things I could tell people, but I reckon that there might be some fun questions to ask about Antarctica. So how about we find out some of them?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Leia, for showing us around the bus and telling us some of those really interesting facts. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a 3-minute break screen on. That will give all the schools watching a chance to send in some questions. Once we get to the end of that 3-minute break screen, I'll read them out and we'll do a real quick round fire of questions and answers. So I'm going to put that screen on now. Okay, hi everyone, welcome back. Thank you so much for sending in lots of questions about Antarctica for Leia. Are you ready, Leia, to get stuck into them?
I sure am keen to hear what the thoughts are.
Okay, all right. So there's a few questions about things that you mentioned in your walk around in the bus, but there's also some questions just about Antarctica in general. So somebody has asked, how cold is Antarctica?
Really, really good question. Antarctica is 4 Ests. Now, if you've had us come and visit you before, you will have known that Antarctica is the coldest, also the windiest, the highest, and the driest continent in the world. In terms of it being the coldest, a cold day here in Tassie, at the moment it's meant to be spring, but it's still about 10 degrees outside today, which is very chilly. So 10 degrees. At 0 degrees, water freezes, which means it's super duper freezing. That's when you get snow. In Antarctica, it's gotten down to minus 98 degrees Celsius.
Wow.
That's the coldest that it's ever been. So if you picture your oven being at 100 degrees hot and picture it being that much but cold, that's how cold it's ever gotten in Antarctica. But it's okay. It's not normally that cold. If you're there in winter, it's normally only about minus 40. So much, much warmer than minus 98, but still a lot colder than zero.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a question here about about Mawson's hut that was built. Like, how cold is it, or how warm is it inside the hut?
Good. So, uh, when Mawson and his team went down, they traveled. Here you go. We can look at it on here. So they were in Adelaide. They came across to Hobart and then shot straight down to a place called Cape Denison in Antarctica. Uh, and in Cape Denison in Antarctica, it is super cold because it's in Antarctica. It's also the windiest part of the windiest continent on the Earth. So they built huts to keep themselves a little bit warmer and a little bit drier, but they still had to keep the huts at 3 degrees. That's the temperature of your fridge. So if you want to know what that felt like, just pop inside your fridge for a couple of hours and see how warm that feels. The reason they couldn't have it any warmer is they had ice that was forming on the inside of the hut. And if they happened to heat that hut up a bit more, ice melts when it gets too warm and it would have dripped on them and made them wet and cold, and the huts wouldn't have done their job very well. So 3 degrees is what it was inside the huts.
Wow. Yeah, wow. And it's a good example with the fridge to give you an idea of how it feels, but definitely don't go inside your fridge, anyone watching, because you won't be able to breathe or get out of your fridge, which I'm sure you would know. Yeah, so they had to keep it at 3 degrees. So how do they keep it at 3 degrees?
Yep. So they had this oven kind of thing. They called it a stove, and they used it for cooking. It was this big, maybe, let's see, would have been about that big, maybe the width of our bus. And they had coal, which they had to bring with them from Australia because Antarctica doesn't have any trees. So they used some coal. They also used fat from some of the animals that were around, and they would keep a fire going in there. Most of the time, but just not too hot so that it didn't melt things. So they could keep a control on how much the fire was burning, and they could slow it down or speed it up if things were getting too warm or too cold.
Yeah, wow. Um, there's a question here about where they landed at Cape Denison, on it, where they landed, but then they got to Cape Denison. Like, what's the distance and how did they get there?
Okay. So um, they they came in, and the place that they came into was it's called Commonwealth Bay, and Cape Denison is just the point at the end of that bay. So if you were trying to look today for where Mawson is and the huts were, you would go to Cape Denison. So there's not that much of a difference there. But the way that they got off the ship, because ships are on water, and then you have to hop onto the ice, and it's not like just hopping onto the land here where there's a nice wooden or a metal pier or a jetty. They had to ease in and nose up right next to the ice. which they could do on the day that they arrived because there was no wind, and no icebergs in the bay, which they thought was a bit funny, but they realized pretty quickly that the reason there weren't any icebergs blocking the way was because the wind, strongest wind in the world, was blowing the icebergs all out to sea and leaving a nice clear passage.
Wow. Yeah, and you work at the Mawson's Huts Foundation, and there's a museum here in Hobart, down on the water, down at Salamanca, which sort of has a replica of the hut. So can people come along? Can anyone come along and see it and get a feel for what it was like living in these conditions?
Absolutely. So there is a museum in Hobart, and the museum itself is a replica. So the museum is the exact size, the exact height. It's even built using the same materials as the original Mawson's huts that are in Antarctica. There are kind of three sections to it. There's the main living hut where there's all the beds in there that have been set up. There's the other hut, which is the workshop. At the moment, that's where the reception is. And then around the outside, there's this veranda. And that's where normally in Antarctica, they kept the food stored, and also the huskies, because they took huskies down to help them move all their equipment and go on long sledging trips. But if you head in there today, we don't have huskies in there and we don't keep food in there. That's just a spot that you can see some other things, including the mast. There's the original mast that was on top. And you can see how much of it has been taken away by all the wind.
Yeah, wow.
Yep, that's in Hobart.
Yeah, amazing. And you said that they constructed the huts from materials. So
Yep.
were they things that they found around them, or things that they brought on the boat?
They brought all the things with them on the boat. It was like, if you've heard of IKEA and IKEA furniture flat packs, that's kind of what they did. So they had all their timber and everything kind of packed flat. They packed it onto the boat, took it all down with them, and built it there because the huts are made out of wood. And at the moment, there are no trees on Antarctica. You might find little bits of moss here and there, but apart from that, there aren't too many land plants around the place.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting thing to say, because there's a question here in the Q&A sort of related to that. Like, is there, under all that snow and ice and that huge land mass, like what would you find? And does it ever melt enough so that you can see land underneath the snow or the ice?
Great question. Yep. So there's a difference between Antarctica, which is at the bottom of the Earth, and the Arctic, which is at the top. The Arctic, see on the map, you can't even see the Arctic. That's because the North Pole, or the Arctic, is just ice on the top of the sea. So it's frozen seawater. Whereas if you go down to the South Pole, to Antarctica, that is a land mass. So it's kind of like Australia if it was really cold and had ice and snow covering it. So if you dug far enough down, which you'd have to dig really, really deep, because it's about 5 kilometers full of ice and snow. That's the average depth of ice and
Whoa.
snow on Antarctica. So you'd be digging 5 kilometers down in most places, and you'd hit rock. Now, there is a spot or a couple of spots in Antarctica that don't actually have that much snow on them year round. One of those places is here. That's the little tail of Antarctica called the Antarctic Peninsula. And that's the part of Antarctica that is closest to the equator. And you might all know that the equator, or the middle bit around the Earth, is where it's really warm. And so when you get a place that's closer to the warm area, there's less snow here. So that's where you might see a lot of rocks. There's also somewhere called the Dry Valleys. There's a picture just around the corner here.
Mm.
These are the dry valleys in Antarctica, which they have hardly any snow, and it's so isolated and so cold and in the middle of nowhere that it hasn't snowed or rained in a very, very, very long time. So yes, there are places on Antarctica with not much snow, and they look pretty crazy.
Yeah, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're warmer by the sounds of it. It's cold.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Very, very cold.
Wow. So does anyone live, this is a question that came through from a couple of different people. Does anyone live on Antarctica permanently?
Great question. Lots of people live on Antarctica, but the main way that they do that is at the research stations. So Australia, we have three research stations called Mawson, Casey, and Davis. Lots of other countries have research stations as well, and they're like these setups in different places on Antarctica where you'll have scientists doing lots of research, but also a lot of different people to help keep the station running. And they might stay normally, you might have people staying over a summer and then different people coming over a winter. But sometimes people will stay for a whole year, so a summer and a winter. And sometimes people will stay longer than that as well. But it's not normal for people to just build a house on Antarctica and live there like we do here in Australia.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, so what sorts of people are there generally for a season or a year? And like, what kind of huts do they live in now? And do they have electricity? How does all that work?
Really good. They definitely have electricity now. They don't have to use animal fat anymore, which is very good. Um, yeah, lots and lots of different types of people uh, go down and work in Antarctica now. So the reason that everyone goes to Antarctica is for science. There's a big thing that was made between different countries called the Antarctic Treaty, and a couple of other arrangements, meaning that Antarctica is a place of science. So everyone who goes down there is doing science or they're there to support science, but also communication. So you've got some artists or some musicians who'll go down to try share what Antarctica is like through their lenses as well, through those different ways of communicating. You also need really important people like tradies. So if you've got an electrician or a plumber or a carpenter, you need these guys to go along and make sure that everything's working as it needs to keep people safe. You also need people to cook because it's pretty cold, pretty far away, and you don't want to have to just go dig up some snow or eat a penguin. So what they do is they also have world-class chefs that go down. If you could think of something that you wanted to do for work, there's probably someone doing something like that, either in Antarctica or to do with Antarctica. It's a very broad uh, place to be part of.
Awesome. We've nearly hit 3 o'clock, 2:30, I mean, Leia. I've got two final questions for you. Okay, so my first question is, why does that penguin that you mentioned before, the starts with G, I think, why does it
Gen 2,
Gen 2? Why would the Gen 2 shoot its poo 1.5 meters? And then also, how can people visit your bus, or how can how can the bus come to them?
that's fantastic. Very unrelated questions. Yeah, so the Gen 2 penguin shoots its poo 1.5 meters. Now, if you're a penguin and you are living on a rock nest, but you don't have a toilet, what you don't want is for your nest or your home to become your toilet. So what they do is they make sure that when they poo, it doesn't just land where they're going to go to sleep, or where they're going to lay their eggs. But the thing is, their neighboring penguin, they don't want the other penguins poo in their nest as well. So they make sure to build the nest 1.5 meters away so that they don't get caught in the crossfire, which is absolutely crazy. Now, if you are having fun with the fun facts and fun penguin things, there are a couple of things that you guys can do related to us. You could come visit the Mawson's Huts Foundation and learn more about Mawson and his men and the adventure they had in Antarctica. You could also head onto our website and book the Mac for a visit at your school. We come all the way around Tasmania, and our bookings are open for next year at the moment. And the other thing is we do have different web worksheets and resources on our website as well, which is www.mawsons-huts.org.au, and then put a slash there, Antarctic-bus. You can find a whole bunch of fun things to explore on there.
Awesome. Leah, I'll make sure I put the link to the resources and the worksheets in the YouTube description. And I'll also send a copy to schools that have watched, and to our Children's University members as well, because this will go on the Children's Uni portal. And so when you say book the MAC, you mean the Mobile Antarctic Classroom?
They do, thank you. Yes, MAC, Mobile Antarctic Classroom.
Awesome. That was really, really interesting, Leah. I learned so much. I had no idea that Antarctic is bigger than Australia. I mean, I could have looked at a map and probably worked that out, but it just doesn't seem, it seems like it's such a small place. But it was really, absolutely loved having you on here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and lovely to get to share a lot more about fun Antarctic stuff with you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. Thanks everyone else who's watched today. We're having a break in October because of the school holidays. But we'll be back on 1st of November with a local children's author. His name is Blake Newto, and he'll be talking about mindfulness and poetry and showing us a video about a book that he's written on that topic. So hopefully we'll see some people in November. But for now, have a great rest of your week. See you later. Bye.